welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel, and that is the R in the RK Stumblingbear. And I am back to talk about the short stories that were nominated for the Hugos. I know recently I posted my Nebula short story reactions, and 3 of the stories that were nominated for the Nebulas were also nominated for the Hugos. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a costume change, and you'll see the footage about those, what I've said about those stories in this video. And you're welcome to skip, if you have already watched that. And then that will be interspersed with my thoughts of the other stories. Again, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about my least favorites working up to my favorites. And I do want to say that overall, I got along better with the stories that were nominated for the Hugos. Still coming in last place, I have We Will Teach You How to Read by Carolyn M. Yoakum. Here are my previous thoughts. This is basically a premise of an alien society is trying to give humanity their story, but they read very differently. The alien society can read multiple threads at one time, so that, imagine reading multiple books at the same time and you're understanding them. That's kind of what that premise is. And structurally, this is interesting, and it's set up because on one side you have a very basic, this is our story, and there's certain words. And then on the other side, you have paragraphs that give more description and talk about why they're reaching out to humanity and how they're trying to teach humanity how to read multiple threads so their story doesn't get lost. You don't really find out much more about these aliens, just that they're at the end of their life and their children are dwindling and their children don't want to continue the reading, which is why they turn to humanity. It was okay. Like I said, I'm not much of a short story person, so when people go experimental, it usually doesn't work for me. Just saying. All right, coming in 5th place, I have 3 Faces of a Beheading by Arkady Martine. This is an interesting one because it started off where I was very invested. You had a soldier who beheads themselves on live TV. Then you find out it's part of a story immersive. So it's a video game kind of type of thing, except in this world, even what you do in these video games is being monitored by Big Brother or the government. And this is and so then we have a character who's trying to not have their actions monitored by the government via, whether that's in person or on the game, but they are still very fascinated with this character, the soldier that beheaded themselves. And that's interwoven with actual academic references or excerpts that are talking about historiography. I'm not sure if I said that right, but the act of writing down history, of repeating history, and how a lot of historians will have a narrative, which, makes sense. An example of Light this Candle, Life and Times of Al Shepard. We're focusing on a person, and you're talking about aspects of his life. And probably not going to talk about, probably not going to focus on how much of a womanizer he was, and more on his career and how he ended up being an astronaut and, flew Mercury. I don't think he flew in Gemini, but he flew then again in Apollo. There is a certain narrative that this historian has put together. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then, I think I found actually those excerpts about how historians use narrative to construct a view, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the whole truth or even a partial truth. It's the narrative that was put together. So I think that this really does a lot more commentary on the things that we're seeing now, how some people still want to say that in the Civil War, the South were righteous and, they were just fighting for freedom, when in reality it was economics that had to deal with slavery. And where we see that states are now turning to history books that say, oh, slavery wasn't that bad, and other paternalistic bullshit. So, even though that this is coming in number fifth, it is very thought-provoking. Now, maybe over time this will actually get better in my estimation. Coming in number fourth, we have Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid in the Omulus Hole? I talked about that in my previous video. Here are my thoughts. So the premise of this is we have this great utopian society, except there is one child that has to suffer for everyone else to have a wonderful time. While this child is in a hole suffering, everything is great. If they die, then a tragedy strikes. There's other deaths around the city, tragic happenings, power goes out, chaos. And so the city begins fighting with itself of whether it should have a load-bearing child, as they call it, in the hole, so that everybody else can have a great life, or if they should just suck it up and deal with that life is sucky and bad things can happen to anyone, and let the child not suffer. It's kind of like the trolley problem, if you've ever studied psychology. Is one death worth all these other deaths? Or is one life worth all these other lives? Yeah, something like that. I got the point of this one. Also, the bigger conversation of, we visit countries who we don't agree with how they're doing things, but we still visit them because they are exciting places to go. And if we're visiting them, does that mean that we agree with them? A couple different commentaries there. Coming in third, I have Marginalia by Mary Robinette Kowal. We start off with a woman who is cooking and taking care of her sick mother, who had been the housekeeper up at the manor house. And then all of a sudden, we find out that there's this terror, this threat, and it's a huge, gigantic snail. And I went, oh, yeah, okay, this is a fantasy. And it's about this woman going out and confronting the snail, because her brother went to watch the knight of the manor ride out to fight it and didn't come back, and so she's worried about him. And by following her mother's advice, ends up finding a way to kill snails, whereas before they could only redirect them. I think there's also some commentary in here about how life doesn't always go how we planned, and there's moments in our lives that you can call pivot moments. So you might be heading down one way, but then you get a chance where you could go, nope, I'm going to go another way, or even turn around. And I felt like this whole story was leading up to a pivot moment for the main character, who I don't remember her name, because at the end, the path that she thought that she was leading for her family, she no longer has to do. And I'm just going to leave it at that. It was if you want a fun kind of adventure where you get a heroine, this is a fun short story. Then coming in number 2, I have Stitched in Skin Like Family by Nevo. This is actually probably tied for first. It's just very different from the other one. I'd say this is like a historical fantasy, and then this is set during the Great Depression. The main character is of Chinese descent, and she had been receiving letters from her brother as he traveled, and then those letters stopped. And she just feels that he's been killed, and so she's out to find out what happened and to seek revenge if necessary. She has a gift where she can touch clothing or cloth, and she gets the sense and feelings of the people who are wearing them. So she ends up going to where her brother's last letter was sent from, finds and finds out what happened and takes her revenge. So, I mean, that's just a straightforward fantasy plot. But then you get the commentary of, this is the Great Depression. It might even be leading up to World War II because they were using slang for people of Japanese descent as well. And it gives you a very clear look of this is how racist, people were of the time, and that they did not give another thought about it. And how, white people will just take and take and take and take unless you actually push back and say no more. I just love also how Nevo writes. I feel like the stories that Nevo puts out are always, like, her writing just feels magical in and of itself, even if the story isn't magical necessarily. So number 1 is 5 Views of the Planet Tataris by Rachel J. Jones. And I already talked about this in my Nebula video, so here are my thoughts again. And this is actually flash fiction. It's less than 1,000 words. And I did understand the structure. It's split into 5 parts because there's 5 views, and they're short. In the first one, we have prisoners who are being transported to a world, and the pilot is hitting debris around the planet, and the prisoners are thinking, oh my gosh, you're awful. You're making this trip, like, worse, when you're trying to kill us. And the pilot's like, yeah, we try to hit as much debris as possible every single time. And then you go to the next view of where the reason why they're there is because the government considers these guys rebels and needs to take them out of society. And then it goes through the process of how they're going to be imprisoned. And then you get the process of what it's like while they're imprisoned. And then the last view is getting to see the shuttle after 10 years and understanding that that pilot wasn't horrible, but that pilot was merciful. Definitely has a lot of commentary on prison systems and views of perspective. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, this is a flash. It's less than 600 words. So I ask everyone to go read this if they can. So like I said, number 2, number 1, those two really are interchangeable. In my head, like, I ended up rating them the same. It just, do I want to think about a fantasy story or I want to think about a sci-fi story? They're both amazingly good at what they're talking about and how it's presented. So yeah, I got along better with this crop of short stories. I think maybe that's the difference between the Nebulas being an industry award, so it's other writers have nominated these, and the Hugos are fan, and the fans have nominated these. And yes, there's industry professionals who are also voting in the Hugos because they're fans themselves. But I think overall, I probably jive more with the fans than the industry professionals because I'm looking for the story, not the technical, like, craft aspect of what it was done. But I will also put a link of all these stories down below. If you read any of them, I would love to know your thoughts and opinions. Thank you, and have a great day.